Good afternoon and welcome to our July 24th, 2019 Council Work Session and our final work session before a summer break, which I think everyone is looking forward to. We have a very full agenda today, and so I'm going to adjust the committee reports on items of interest. We have a first item that I'm going to put first on the list, and a suggestion that we might postpone the motion related to the city manager's performance rating average until after the break. I think it's not time sensitive and it reduces the conversation by one piece. So I know I have Chris with something to mention on the committee reports and items of interest.
Thank you. I would like to make a motion to reconsider Monday night's resolution condemning white nationalism and alt-right activities and groups, and if I receive a second, I will explain my rationale.
Second.
My rationale is that I think it would be nice if the City Council could provide greater and more forceful support for this particular resolution to demonstrate clearly that the city is opposed to this level of racism and activity that's going on. So that is my reason for bringing it back. It is not to try to defeat it or to significantly change it. I simply think I would like to provide the opportunity for us, after a couple of days of reflection, to be able to vote on it again.
All right. I'm opening this to discussion. I'm just going to say on this, I'm going to limit this to 1 round per person, a minute per round. Because of time
just
issues.
as a parliamentary
Yeah.
procedure, I looked this up. We first need to vote on whether or not to reconsider.
That's right.
Then if we do vote to reconsider, then we can talk about the merits of the actual.
Perfect, yes, just giving everyone's a heads up. So, but yes,
So just a question, is there an amended resolution that we would be considering?
we would get to that, yes.
Okay.
And only 3 of us may vote.
That is
No, we can all vote.
Everyone can vote.
Only
only-
someone who voted in the affirmative can bring it up.
Right.
You can only make the motion, but all can vote.
On the
Okay.
winning side, for lack of a better
So-
way to say it. Yes.
Okay.
So right now, all you're voting on is to put the original motion to adopt the resolution back on the table.
Right.
All in favor of putting the original motion back on the table?
Which motion?
The motion to reconsider the
Motion to
resolution.
reconsider the
Monday night's
Monday night's
resolution.
resolution, to put it back on the table. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, excellent, that passes. All right, so I'm limiting, I have Councilor Semple first in the queue, then Councilor Clark. 1 minute, 1 round per person, because time is an issue. So take it away.
I'm going to talk as fast as I can. I am proud to have brought the resolution condemning white nationalism and alt-right activities and groups from the Human Rights Commission. White nationalism is a serious threat to our community. I thank Councilor Pryor for bringing the resolution back today so we can revisit it. I fully intended to vote in favor on Monday night and spoke enthusiastically for its passage. All councilors spoke against white nationalism actions, and I would like council to make a strong unanimous resolution consistent with our often stated commitment of creating a community where all people feel welcome and safe. Councilor Clark brought up the idea that we might be condemning thoughts. That would be against my core values of freedom of speech and civil rights. I struggled with the term condemn, as it felt we might be taking actions against certain people for their beliefs rather than their actions. I asked for more time to consider this possible and unintended path toward Big Brother thought control. I was denied the 2 days for due diligence, and I felt I had to vote no to an action that could affect everyone's safety. I spent the last 2 days researching and considering my dilemma. Condemn means to express complete disapproval of something. I have no problem or difficulty disapproving of white nationalism actions leaving all free to think and believe whatever we want. I am grateful for the opportunity to change my vote to yes and look forward to working with council on the actions in our actual resolution, sections 1 through 4. Thank you.
Thank you, and I misspoke because I intended to give you all 2 minutes, so that's why the light went off and then it went back on again. Apologies. All right, Councilor Clark.
Thank you very much. I would like to vote in favor of this, as I mentioned the other night. As I thought would happen. In the intervening 2 days, I've already been called a racist in multiple places on social media and in the weekly, I think. And I find that really unfortunate because my objection to this was principled, and I don't personally have a belief that any particular race is more superior or inferior to any other. Let's be clear about that. My problem with that had more than just the issue of the beliefs at stake. The other issue for me was that parts of it were incendiary and factually questionable, which is why I spent the time to make the edits between that night and today, and I have emailed that to all of you. They're very minor tweaks that would create a resolution that I would be happy to vote in favor of. It alters things like the words a belief into the promotion of the idea, for example. I would move then to substitute that language that I emailed for those places in the resolution so that we might have a unanimous vote. I don't believe any of them changed the context or the content of the ad, or of the resolution, and it left all three of the therefores completely intact. It was just the statements of fact in advance that I asked to be changed. If I have a second, I'll speak to it.
I'll
for a moment.
second.
Thank you.
And can I also, there were two places, since you've made the motion now,
Right.
there were two places where you had ors. If you can clarify which
I'm-
one you're putting
if-
forward.
If there are those who will vote in favor of this, I will happily accept anyone's suggestion for which of those choices they are more comfortable with. I'm fine with any of them. In two places, I left other language available that I thought would be equal in its emphasis and its meaning, but a different word selection that I felt better about. And I will choose them if any, but just because I was asked to, and if somebody wants it differently, that's fine. I'll choose the word republic in the first instance and emphasizing in the second. I think it's important for us to make this statement, and I would like to be able to vote for it, removing those things that were troubling in the way of condemning people's beliefs, and a couple of places that had, I don't want to say incendiary language, that's too much, but troubling language. Thank you.
Anybody else needing to speak to this proposed change? Alan?
Could you just be very specific for the record about what you're changing?
Sure. The first instance was to, in all mentions of the word we're a democracy, to say we're a republic because of sake of accuracy, but frankly, if nobody wants that one, I'd gladly lose it because that's not that important to me. But in item C, to replace the words "the belief that" with "the promotion of the idea that." In item D, the addition of the words alt-right, and many of which have been emboldened by the national political dialogue, I asked to be stricken. It remains all the other pieces that were the critical part of that item. In item E, replace the word maintaining with the word emphasizing. In item H, strike all that begins with "for example," ... and pick it up again where it talks about the state of Oregon. And for me, that one was, there are certain portions of that "for example" part that were not necessary to make the statement for resolution, and were at least questionable or debatable to many people who are not racists. And I thought it went a little too far, and I wanted something that I could agree with, which leaves intact the entire issues of the histories of the states of Oregon and Eugene. Thank you.
Okay, any other, Chris? And
Well, I said
Claire.
I'd be happy to lose that, but that's fine.
2 minutes, Chris?
Yeah, I would like to be able to find a way for us to become unanimous, and so I'm looking at this. The one, and it's really the question I have is, what we're really trying to say is, we want to condemn racism, we want to condemn the actions of racism, but it's okay to be racist. That's what we're saying. And the difficulty I have is to say it's okay to be a racist, just like it's okay to be a child murderer, or it's okay to be a pedophile, sits uncomfortably with me, because I think there are certain things that it's not okay to be. And I understand the whole, I will defend your right to the death to be able to say it. I get that. But we're in times now where being a racist is very difficult to hide.
I hope you're not calling me that, sir.
No, I'm not. I'm not calling you that.
That's how it.
I appreciate your argument, and I'm not calling you a racist. But what I'm saying is, for those who are racists, it's very difficult to conceal the fact because it comes out. The thinking like a racist, being a racist, you can't help but that comes out. It comes out in words. And somebody might say, you're entitled to say what you want to. And the problem is, if you are the group in power, and you say something that is against a group that is not in power, that by its very nature is intimidating. And so to me, the concern is, well, if you want to be a racist and you want to say racist things, we need to defend your right to do that. But if I am the group in power and I say something that intimidates others just through words, that's a challenge. And so I agree we should try to be as open and as defensive of people's ability to believe what they want to believe. But I also know that it's very hard for those beliefs to be retained entirely within and to not come out. And once they come out, they are bad and intimidating and need to be condemned.
Claire.
Thank you. So in terms of the changes that are being proposed with this motion, I could live with all of them except the striking and replacing in item E of the word maintaining, because I do believe that that is a huge part of the purpose and scope of white supremacy, is to maintain that regime and that situation. And I just want to take my 2 minutes to say, you know, people can have whatever thoughts they wish. But I don't believe that we have to make space in our community to accommodate or tolerate the robust expression of beliefs such as white supremacy. If we are silent or timid in the face of racist beliefs that promote supremacy of one race over another, we are complicit in allowing those beliefs to take up greater and greater space, which is what we've seen over the last year or so, and therefore gain greater legitimacy to expressing them and then acting upon them in ways that are detrimental to individuals and community. So this resolution and nothing we are talking about is saying we will ban people from believing something or even speaking about what they believe in a public forum or any other place where free speech should prevail, or that we are in any way intending to use the power of government to stop people from speaking their beliefs. But we are stating our objection to those beliefs and standing with those who are targeted by them.
Was that a friendly?
In the beginning of saying what I would accept and what I wouldn't. I'm just telling you, if you modified your motion.
I'd accept that as a friendly.
Okay.
Okay.
So I said I would accept, I could live with all of those changes except the proposed change in section E. That I would want it to still read, maintain white supremacy.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but for the sake of us being able to vote unanimously and me being able to vote for it, I'll accept that friendly.
Does your second?
Your second, I accept it.
Okay. All right. So second accepts that, friendly. Okay, so now it's all of the changes except for removing the word maintaining in E. So eliminating all of the examples, H, for example, those all get eliminated.
So, and I think, and I just want to make this clarification, you're actually, is your proposal to eliminate starting with, for example, and then starting with the sentence white supremacy groups called, but then picking back up at the state
Correct.
of Oregon has history?
Correct.
So it
It
eliminates
leaves
the
in
two
all of
sentences.
our historical and local transgressions. But it leaves out another section that talks more about beliefs.
And if, unless it's changed through a friendly, when you read through changing the word to republic, you read one example, it came up two other
There were,
times.
three of them.
So all three of them.
All three of them. I'm
Unless
happy to let
changed.
that one go too, if somebody's concerned about
Which
that.
one was that one?
Thank you for the clarification.
Which one was that?
The words republic instead of democracy.
Oh, right, okay,
I'm happy to let that go too,
okay,
in order to meet in the middle on this.
okay, okay. All right, Claire spoke, Betty.
Thank you. All I wanted to say was that when you have to hide something, it becomes more dangerous. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to prompt you, I'm only giving you one round, and you've had a round. Correct?
I just
No,
asked
not
what
on
we're
this one.
voting on.
Oh, okay, good. All right, you're back, then, sorry. I'm getting lost in my list, then. Go for it.
Two of these kind of bother me in that, in D, striking the words, many of which have been emboldened by the national political dialogue. The reason we're having this conversation is because of the national political dialogue. That's a fact.
I thought it
We
was
wouldn't
the
be having that conversation had we not, and also the rise in it locally. And then, so if that's, again, I think that's running away from why we're doing this, so I don't know that I support that. And then in H, I can see the problem with the wording of the white supremacy called for, but the thought that, and maybe we can add this back into just as a matter of fact that that we did deplorably put Japanese Americans
I'd happily add, we all did, yes.
in leading. So maybe some language around that could
If you have a
delete the
friendly,
white
I'll accept
supremacy and
it.
leave that in, that we did do that.
Not just white supremacists, but all of us.
Yeah, well, yeah, it kind of implies that they led the movement, when in fact that wasn't the case.
Right, that's my problem.
Research.
Okay.
President Reagan signed a authorization after a study that said that national security was not really the reason for the internments, it was racial prejudice.
Yeah.
So substituting the words for white supremacist groups, which can't be proof that they did it, but you could say extreme racial prejudice resulted in the deportation of Japanese Americans, because that is an official report signed by President Reagan.
Happily accept that friendly.
Okay,
Wasn't quite done.
okay,
That's-
sorry, it's like, it's out of control.
That was a
Carry
great-
on, Alan.
Great friendly.
It was a good.
And so then the other part of it, which is in D, may have which been emboldened by the national political dialogue, would you accept a friendly to delete that? Or to
If you want to
keep that
reword it,
included?
I'd hear it, but I don't agree that's why the thing came forward, nor do I want to blame the current, I don't blame one political party for it, which is how it reads.
It doesn't read.
It doesn't say that, Mike. I mean, the words are important.
National political
I
dialogue.
agree words
it
are
says.
important.
The national political dialogue is everybody.
So everybody's being racist?
The dialogue is
No, the dialogue
It seems to
is-
point to some.
reflecting. The dialogue is reflecting that racist tension.
If that were the words, I would accept it.
Say that again, Mayor.
And a national dialogue that reflects.
Period.
National dialogue that
Language,
that reflects that racist
content.
racist content, right,
Accepted.
okay,
Okay, I'll buy that.
okay.
So can I just,
And a national
National
dialogue.
dialogue,
Strike all
national
right.
political
Right.
dialogue that reflects that
Yeah, but
racist,
And a national dialogue that reflects that racist tension.
okay.
This is ridiculous.
well, this-
Happily accepted.
okay. All right,
She has to accept it too.
I accept.
accept, okay. Jennifer,
Okay, so thank you, Chris. I appreciate that rewording to address the issues with the war. I'm okay with that. That solves the problem. So are we still striking, I just want to make sure that today white supremacy groups, including militias, are advocating that sentence? Is that
I'm
still
sorry,
being struck?
which item?
It's under H.
Second sentence.
I just want to make sure I'm clear.
We struck everything and then brought back and
We brought
reworded
back
the
the
Japanese
first
American.
sentence,
We're
right.
still striking the second.
Up to, and then it starts again on
Right.
the state of Oregon.
Correct.
Okay, so we are saying that white supremacy groups are not advocating for the apprehension, detention, and deportation of Central American refugees, because I feel like they are.
I don't believe it is just them, nor do I, and there's a whole argument to be had here that we don't have time for, I don't believe. But I would suggest to you that there are many people who are neither racist, nor are they in any way prejudiced that believe that as a matter of law. I'm not one of them, by the way. I've spoken on this repeatedly, that as a proud Republican, my party's dead wrong on the issue of immigration. And I'm not one of them that thinks people should be rounded up and deported. However, there are many people who are not racists who believe that. And you're saying, by de facto, anyone who does believe that is a racist. And I have a problem with that.
No, we are saying that some groups are doing it because I don't think we're saying that.
It reads that way to me and to many, besides the fact that you can't legally apply for asylum within the country, which is a statement of this fact.
I appreciate, I understand what you're saying. I don't agree with it. I'm not comfortable taking it out. I think it's a huge issue in our country right now and in our community. And I think taking it out would be a mistake. I'm also not in favor of striking alt-right because I think that is also very appropriate to call out those groups in particular for, yeah, but we're striking it down here somewhere. It is still in the title. All right, I can probably get there. So if we can leave this statement in H alone, fix the one that Chris fixed, I guess everything else is fine. But I won't vote for it if we take out the part, that second sentence of H.
It says, today, white supremacist groups, ...
Yeah, I think so.
It can be rewritten so that it isn't so
Okay.
incorrect and
All right, so hold on. So do we have a sense of where we are on this text?
I do.
Yeah, the only question I was just seeking, just making sure I've got the change to D is accurate. So when we get there, I just want to make sure I've got it written correctly because it was.
Okay, everyone's had a round. Everyone's had a little bit more than 2 minutes.
I didn't have to.
You had a round. Do you have it? No. So are we ready to vote on this amended text?
Point of clarification, is the second sentence in H still there or not there?
Right, that's where I'm asking.
Unless we want to rewrite it.
Next. Could someone read section
someone has a
8? Could
friendly
we
that
read
reads
that, the questionable section H? Okay.
You have to read it in
Right.
context
So-
from the previous sentence.
So what, I don't, this doesn't have the edit
So,
of Chris.
as amended, so right now, H says, we understand the city of Eugene exists with the historical context of our state and nation. Marginalized communities have experienced generational oppression and traumas related to the decision made by people and governments in both the past and the present. White supremacy groups have a history of advocating for the marginalization of communities and color through government policies. For example, extreme racial prejudice resulted in the deportation of Japanese Americans following Pearl Harbor, leading to government action that resulted in the forced relocation to incarceration camps in deplorable living conditions. And the next sentence is stricken, and it picks back up at the state of Oregon also has a history of enacting racial policies, and then it continues from there.
Clarify D.
And D?
And D, thank you for asking. So the way I have it is, with the friendly is, we recognize that there has been a rise of white nationalists and white supremacist groups in the United States, and that the national political dialogue reflects this racial tension.
Trying to reach halfway here, guy.
What
Okay.
if we, oh, sorry.
Go for
it's
it.
my turn. How about, what if we took out specific, we just said today groups are advocating for the apprehension, detention, and deportation of,
Fine with that.
is that okay?
Fine with that. I'll accept that.
I accept.
Okay. Okay. So we are now ready to,
Speak and others can't.
well, do you have something else to say, Betty? Go for it.
What I wanted to do is make a motion that we postpone. I think it's
already an
ridiculous
amended
to be
motion on the table.
rewriting
It's already-
something in this way.
No, it's already on the table, so
Okay.
You can make a motion.
You can make a motion. to postpone.
Second
Okay,
motion.
all right.
Second motion, you can't make a second motion. The motion to pass, motion to
Wait.
amend, you can't make a third motion.
Let's hear from.
Because we have a motion to reconsider, the motions to postpone are different. And so you can't just postpone the motion to reconsider that, because it brings the other motion back up on the table.
Okay, all in favor? Wait, got it.
I don't know what that means. I mean, you can never postpone working on a motion to reconsider. It always has to be taken up and dealt with right then and there.
No, you can so you've voted on the motion to reconsider, and so there's actually, so it
That's on the
brings the
table.
thing back up. You have a motion to amend it. If you table them, or if you're tabling the motion to amend, you have to, you still have the main motion on the table. So if you want to vote on the motion to amend and then vote on the main motion, you could postpone to a date certain the amended motion, but you can't wrap it all in because the motion to reconsider brought the one back onto the table.
And my understanding is if we reconsider, we have to do it at this meeting for a vote that we held on an earlier meeting, so we can't postpone reconsideration.
Well, and so you can,
Postpone it to a date certain.
but you actually voted to pass it you voted, the motion to reconsider itself
Stays in place.
actually didn't need to be voted, it could have been postponed and voted on a later date. The fact that you voted on it, and I don't have my Robert's Rules of Books in front of me, I wish I did at this moment, but it is, you should be voting on it today. That's the simplest answer. That is, there's some gobbledygook around there, but you should vote on it today since the motion passed.
Right.
To reconsider.
Got it. Okay, so we have amended text. You want one more
It's
question?
important that if we're going to amend this, that we amend it to get to a unanimous
Yes.
decision.
Right, exactly.
And I'm afraid Counselor Taylor's motion indicates that she's not willing to have it be unanimous unless we have some more time to think about it.
I don't know if it would be helpful, but I've been writing this down.
I didn't say that. I think it's ridiculous to be this kind of
I think so, too.
I think so too.
rewriting
But we've done it.
the way, it's really messy and I don't like it. And what I thought was it would be better if we really consider this thoroughly and vote on it after the break. But obviously, that's not the feeling of most people here, so.
And there are constraints around that, so
I'm trying to get there.
we're trying to get there. Okay, the motion, the amended resolution is on the table. All,
On the amendment.
We didn't
We're
vote
voting
for
on
the
the
amendment
we're
yet.
voting, that's what I'm saying. The amendment is on that table. All in favor of
the
the
amendment?
amended resolution.
Of the
amendments
The amendments to the resolution.
Okay.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Excellent. Okay, so that passes. Now we vote on the
Amended motion.
amended motion. All in favor? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so now we are complete. Congratulations. Thank you very much. And I will just say as a closing comment, this was incredibly important conversation to have. Good that we labored through it, but I would say to council in the future, when you receive a proposed resolution a month in advance or 2 weeks in advance, to do your editing before we come to the first conversation and not after we voted on it. So just a point of process for all of you. If you're not happy with it, let us know beforehand. Okay, thank you. And now we're on to our next order of business, implementation of construction excise tax.
We're not having items.
We have a minute at the end. I'll come back to items.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. I'm Michael Kennison with Community Development Division, and I'm here with Stephanie Jennings and with Community Development, and Lydia Kay with our Building and Permit Services. And we're here to talk to you about implementation of the construction excise tax and use of affordable housing trust funds. And just a little bit of background to get us started. In 2016, to address the critical need for additional local sources of revenue for affordable housing, the state legislature authorized local governments to establish a construction excise tax, or CET. In April of 2019, City Council passed an ordinance establishing a local CET. The CET is one of many strategies the city is pursuing to address barriers to housing affordability, availability, and diversity identified through the Housing Tools and Strategies Initiative. An update on progress on that body of work was provided to you via memo this week. Where's the, oh, you were ahead of me. Okay, so today, the purpose of today is to provide an update on progress made to date to implement the construction excise tax and prepare for use of the funds generated. Review a timeline for implementation of a program to begin allocating those funds. Review proposed scope and structure of an advisory committee. And most importantly, hear feedback from you on the above and your thoughts on preferred outcomes and focus areas for use of the funds. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lydia.
So the progress to date, the first thing that we did after you passed the CET was to form an internal team to start implementing the construction excise tax. And that team was a combination of staff from community development, building and permit services, our legal team, and financial folks. We started by preparing administrative rules largely around how the tax is collected. And then how it is distributed, which is dictated by the ordinance and state law. It was really important, once we got those ducks in a row, that we start training first with our internal staff, because they're the people who are going to be talking to a lot of the public about this, especially people who don't understand. So we had a lot of conversations with folks who maybe hadn't heard it, people like our inspectors who are out in the field a lot and had some really great questions, and their questions and the feedback we had from other staff allowed us to prepare a really detailed FAQ that we can use, a frequently asked questions sheet for our customers. Then we spent quite a bit of time. It seems like a simple thing to apply the tax, but when we get down into the weeds, we have some really complex and fabulous internal systems, like our building permit tracking system, and we have some great staff who are able to make the changes to our technological electronic software so that we were able to collect that tax. That was implemented and started being collected on July 1st. We do currently have an assessment of about $15,500, I heard from the financial folks, as of today. We've only received residential projects to date, so we'll expect those numbers to go up as the commercial projects start coming in. And with that, I'll let Stephanie talk about the outreach and the rest of the process.
As we move towards implementation, I did additional outreach to other jurisdictions that have a CET, particularly Bend and Corvallis, with a focus on understanding how they have set up their advisory committees, as that's one of the next steps in our process. And then also continue discussions with Housing Policy Board, Better Housing Together, just to make sure that they're aware of the steps that we were taking at this point. But there'll be more opportunities for community input once we establish the advisory committee. So we have established a draft timeline for the next steps. So as Lydia mentioned, we've started the collection of CET funds. It will take some time for those resources to accumulate. We intend to form an advisory committee as described in the ordinance, and to work with that advisory committee from September to December to consider the best ways to support an expanded range of projects. In December, we'll need to bring on additional staff capacity to support program implementation, and we plan to come back to council in January 2020 to present proposed programs and a funding allocation, which will set us up to do a project-specific RFP in the spring. In terms of the advisory committee, really the sort of functions of the advisory committee is to advise the city on development of goals and related programs, allocation of resources among programs, selection of specific projects, and program implementation. This is quite similar to how we work with the CDBG advisory committee that advises the city on use of CDBG funds. In terms of composition, as I mentioned, we did look at other advisory committees and how they're structured. We're proposing a 9-person committee which would have 3 representatives from the private sector, 3 housing and population advocates, and then 3 at-large seats. This is quite similar to the model that Bend uses for their advisory committee. And it brings together both technical expertise as well as a range of community voices to advise the city. We would solicit applications for committee members in August and make a recommendation to the city manager, who would select the committee members, and then hopefully hold our first advisory committee meeting in late September. In terms of desired outcomes and potential focus areas, so the ordinance itself states that the funds would be used to fund housing programs and projects that benefit Eugene households earning 100% of area median income and below. The 2019 area median income is $64,900, just to give you a sort of sense of what that level is. 15% of the residential CET must be set aside for down payment assistance in accordance with state law, so that is built in. And then in terms of potential focus areas, really subsidizing the supply of new affordable housing is a kind of key goal of many CET funds and programs. This is a big focus for both Bend and Corvallis. I would include both rental and homeownership units within this category. Preservation of existing affordable housing is another potential goal. It's another way that we currently use our federal funds, but we don't have enough resources to support that need. And then a third area for consideration is direct assistance to renters and homebuyers. This is an idea that has come up in several different places as well. Of course, there will be opportunities to explore other ideas that might be identified by the committee members or by counselors in the discussion that follows the presentation. And there were many ideas that came from the Housing Tools and Strategies process. We will be doing a new consolidated planning process, so we will find ways to incorporate these lessons learned and ideas into this process. So just as an example, when you look at our consolidated plan, our current affordable housing goals and strategies, you see the goal and then the associated program. It won't look exactly the same, but you can kind of imagine that this is what we will come back to you with as a framework in January with more specific details. So in terms of next steps, we anticipate to return in January 2020 with recommendations for programs and a proposed allocation of funds. At that point in time, we will have the general fund contribution of $500,000 plus the accumulation of revenue through the CET fund. And then we would then come back at a later point for approval of investments for large housing developments that would be solicited through an RFP in the spring. At this point, I'll take any questions or comments.
All right, I have Mike and then Claire in the queue, and then Alan.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Could you remind me, because I don't think I heard you clearly, is the pilot down payment assistance program, is that in state laws, the 15%, or is that something we've decided to do?
It's in state law.
Okay.
And the way that it works is that we take that money, we send it to Oregon Housing and Community Services. They then grant it to the Homeownership Center for Eugene, and that money can only be used for down payment assistance within the city of Eugene.
Essentially, so that's going to NEDCO to administer, or who?
They are the current homeownership counseling and down payment assistance agency, yes.
One of my challenges with this, there are several with the CET in general, is that it makes housing more expensive and at the same time tends to generate, in other words, what we tend to use that money for is more rental housing. That's what gets created, affordable, low-income, subsidized, whatever you want to call it. Most of the housing that gets created, almost all, I would think in that category, is rental housing. There's no better way to even wealth and income inequality than through home ownership. It's simply an absolute fact that's been proven over and over again. And I think that if we, one of my fears is that we're doing more to make purchased homes more expensive and creating an even larger percentage of rental homes. And we have, as a ratio of rented homes to homes occupied by the owner, we have one of the highest rental rates in any city west of the Rockies. And it tends towards the creation of poverty in a community that has a higher rental versus home ownership rate. So for me, the idea that we could do even more than this to help low-income folks buy homes, I think is exceptionally good policy. So I would, just as a personal, my choice would be that we expand this beyond 15% as dramatically as we feel comfortable to do so, because it eliminates poverty and it addresses wealth inequality in our community and fights against the idea that we have such a high degree of rentals. And it certainly helps the folks involved in purchasing a home change the future for their family if we're doing it for low-income folks. So I advocate that we do as much of that as humanly possible.
Okay, Claire?
Thank you. Thanks for this report. I like the way I see this progressing. I like the makeup of the proposed committee. I think that makes sense. So once that committee is up and running, to whom will they be making their recommendation? Will it be to the city manager or to the council?
So this is, the way the ordinance sets it up, it is an advisory committee to staff, but we would be bringing back the allocation and proposed projects to council.
Okay, so their role is to work with staff
Yes.
to make recommendations that staff would then bring to council.
Right,
Okay.
which is similar to how it works with the CDBG advisory committee
Gotcha.
at this point.
Okay.
Yes.
And so I do see that some of my priority ideas on focus areas for how we use the funding are included on your list, renter and homeowner assistance both. So that makes me happy. I would hope that once they're up and running and really digging into their work, that they would look at other rental and or homeowner assistance programs that we have in the region and make sure we're complementing those, not duplicating them. And could we use this funding to build more permanent supportive housing as a specific type of housing, given that our TAC report has suggested we need about 350 additional units of that to
Yes.
help reduce our homeless population?
Yes, it can be. I will say there's some strategy involved when you're kind of thinking about using our federal funds versus our local funds. Because so much subsidy is needed for permanent supportive housing, it almost always is going to need federal funds.
Sure.
And so I would maybe think about prioritizing using our federal funds for that, because you already have all of the federal requirements that will have to be applied to those projects. And then think about CET funds in ways that you might be more creative. But the great thing is that we have flexibility. And so we can look at the projects that are coming forward from year to year and decide how best to kind of mix and match the funds that are available to us.
Yeah, and that's what I'd envisioned, knowing that our federal funds are very limited and restricted and lots of criteria for how and when and who gets to use them, and that we have this, I mean, one of the reasons I supported creating this fund is the flexibility that will give us. So I am going to be really looking for creativity from the recommendations of the advisory committee and staff to make the best use of our CET dollars in places that we cannot use federal or state funding to get at the goals that we've identified as council wanting to see. And I think those were all of my questions. Thanks.
Alan?
So back in March, we heard from the Renter Protections Task Force, and they were working on a report. It's going to have several recommendations in it, and I'm wondering what the status of that is and how that gets integrated into this process.
So As a result of council direction at that work session, we have worked with the Housing Policy Board to set up a Renter Protections Advisory Committee. We're actually just in the process of selecting the members of that committee, and with the idea of trying to have representation. It's a subcommittee of the Housing Policy Board, and they have tried to kind of narrow down what the focus areas are going to be that they're going to look at. And so Councilor Pryor has been involved in some of those discussions at the Housing Policy Board. And so that work is really just starting. I will say, there were, the idea of security deposit assistance has come up multiple times. And so that is why this is on the list already for something to consider for use of CET funds. There may be other things that come up through the consolidated planning process, through the work with this committee and with the Housing Policy Board, that we would pursue either through use of our federal funds, other policies that aren't related to funding, or with CET funds.
So what about the task team that did the survey and how does that relate to what you were just talking about?
So
It's not the same thing.
No, well, so the task team, so the prior sort of work plan of the Housing Policy Board was to implement the survey and to present a report that for council consideration, which is what we did earlier this year. And then after hearing your direction about what you wanted to do, we went back to Housing Policy Board and said, can we form a committee of the Housing Policy Board to specifically look at a limited set of issues? And because there's so many different issues related to renter protections, we tried to say, how could we narrow this down a little bit? And then really trying to have the right set of community representatives at the table, recognizing, that there are multiple perspectives on renter protection issues, so that we could come back with a fully fleshed out set of recommendations for council consideration.
So when we started this whole affordable housing journey, the Affordable Housing Task Force group focused in on ways to change the rules so that we get more affordable housing. It was scant. There's only 10% of people on that group were actually renters. So there was very little, if any, things about renter assistance or renter protections or moving things on the renter side of things. And there were, the stuff that they came up with didn't have anything about that. The survey illustrates numerous things that can be done to help people not get into a position of losing their house, which makes it much more difficult for them to maintain affordable housing and residents in it. So, so that is, I think, should be the focus of this money. Since we chose to cut the CET in half from 1% to 0.5%, we don't have as much money to deal with. So I agree that the federal money that we have should be focused on expanding the supply of new affordable housing. If we had more money, we could help do that, but I don't think we don't have that money because we didn't choose to do that. So I think that all of this money should actually be directed towards assistance to renters and home buyers. Included in that is the down payment assistance. Down payment assistance is just for home buyers, correct? So there's a whole other part about rental payment assistance fund that could be established, helping people get their first and last months, having navigators that help people navigate this very complicated system with scant amount of affordable housing options for them. It's a very daunting task to be able to even find affordable housing. So, and then the whole issue of single application process, having to pay a fee, $75 or $100 or whatever the fee is for each time you put in an application. If you're low income, that's a big deal. One single application process for all the renters in the area. Portland area has already done this, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. One application that everybody can access, a policy on deposits about what they can be used for and how they get returned. It's another thing that I think this money should be geared towards. There's no rules about that. We don't have a protocol or policy about deposits, so people often don't get their clean deposits, even though they clean the whole apartment. So that's the type of stuff that I think we need to focus in on with this small amount of money that we're going to have to work on this.
Jennifer.
Thank you. So I'm going to agree with Alan and Mike. I think that we should focus our money on the bottom 3 items on here and less on creating. That seems more like it's more important to be for the federal funding and stuff. So, and I agree with Mike. I think that just because we're required to do 15% doesn't mean we shouldn't look at doing more. I actually 100% agree with everything you said. So that is a great moment for me. So I had a question. It's been a long week, man.
It's a happy, fuzzy day, isn't it?
It is. What is a housing like under your green box here, housing and population advocates? So a housing consumer advocate, who would that be?
So in other committees, we have someone who is a renter who has a limited income. And so we're looking for somebody who has lived experience.
Okay.
And can share their perspectives and the perspectives of others that are trying to find housing and trying to keep their housing.
And so then a housing advocate would be someone that's more like a provider, and the other one is someone who's
correct.
Just a person living their life.
So for example, one of the longtime representatives on the Housing Policy Board is John Van Laningham, who works for Legal Aid Oregon Law Center, and so he's an advocate.
Right. Okay. I just want to make sure I understood
Yes.
it.
Good question.
I think this is well done. I appreciate this report very much. When you guys come back, for me, it would be very helpful that when you make your recommendations, that you create some context around that. Like, we chose not to do this because this other program is already doing that, or we stuck to this percentage because we know this much money from over here is already going to that. So it kind of, because we have all these different programs and it's very hard to keep track of them, and kind of having it in context would be very helpful for making, being like, yeah, that makes sense now that I see that these people are doing this over here.
Yep.
That-
I mean, one thing that I would add, so I tend to try to sort of think about what's the goal? So we want to create more affordable homeownership opportunities. There are multiple programs and ways that you can get to that outcome. And, so for example, we used to have a down payment assistance program, and we found that the people who qualified for it couldn't find homes that they could afford, or that they were competing with cash buyers. And so part of it is then you shift to, okay, well, how do we create affordable homeownership units that are reserved for this population? And so those are just some of the kinds of ways that we will be working with this committee. We, of course, will invite providers and people who are experienced. We'll look at other jurisdictions and think about what is the best way to get to the outcome. So I think hearing the intent of what you all would like to achieve, and then we can work through what are the different possible strategies and ways to do that within our community.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, Chris.
Thank you. Great report and actually great conversation. I think the nature of our conversation today really illustrates just how complicated this subject is, and which leads me to my main interest in what the CET was trying to do, and it was to provide maximum flexibility with the money. We've been receiving money at the federal level for many years, and the constraints on that money is such that we've only really been able to use it in very specific ways and for very specific populations. And one of the beauties of the CET, particularly the way we've implemented it, is it provides us, which is what we're talking about today, with a lot more opportunities and a lot more options. And inherent in that, though, is there's a lot more open mouths in the nest and only so many worms. And so we have to try to decide what's going to get fed and what doesn't get fed and how much it gets fed. And I don't think that's a problem. I think that's part of what this process has been set up to try to do. But what I want to also put into it as a factor to consider is that the housing needs in Eugene are not static, and they're not all one size fits all. There are socioeconomic, there are demographic, there are timeline considerations with regard to who wants what kind of housing and where. And one of the beauties of this is it could be used to be flexible in terms of being able to meet socioeconomic, demographic, and timeline needs. What somebody needs in the long term may be different than what they may need in the short term. What they need based on their demographic could be different. Their geography and their socioeconomic situation. So there's a variety of considerations that this money could be able to meet from that standpoint, but also, and one of my intentions was the recognition that, yeah, it's not going to be a huge amount of money on its own, but some of the options in here provide for the opportunity to leverage this money with other sources of funds so that you can create greater impact. And in Bend, they did that to great effect in terms of how they could leverage a smaller amount of money to achieve a much greater outcome. I'm looking forward to being able to do that as well in a variety of different housing types. So I have great hope for what this money can do, but also I have great recognition that there's going to need to be a lot of thought about where this smaller amount of money gets applied in order to ensure that it can meet the greatest demand and still achieve what we want it to do.
I have Alan wanting a second round. Does anyone else need to speak who hasn't? Betty, go for it.
Thank you. I want to point out that I think I'm correct that we're not getting any additional money for 2 years. Is that correct? We're forgiving the development funds.
What we're doing is we're getting additional dollars that are earmarked specifically for housing affordability. So we are getting new money into that particular program.
But it's general
across the
fund money.
board in the city. We're not getting brand new. We're getting new CET money, but it's being offset by the SDCs. And so there's new money into the system.
So we're not going to have more money.
You will have more money to work with housing affordability.
More money will be redirected.
Yes, more money will be put into this fund.
I understand that, but it's not new money. We don't have more money than we had before. If you reduce the if you forgive the SDCs equivalent to the tax you're collecting.
Right, it's not that they're not paying the SDCs through development. The SDCs is being paid through a different mechanism, so that's a true statement. So.
New net money to the city.
I see it as a pretend tax. But anyway, what I think if we're spending money, we're spending more general fund money on housing. But I agree with that it should be, I don't know how we'll decide who gets it, who gets the money, but I think help with down payment's important, but help with first and last month's rent is crucial. If people are without housing, they can't possibly, if they have limited income, it's almost impossible to have money for security deposit first and last month. I agree that homeownership is a way to increase your wealth, usually. Thank you.
Okay, Alan?
So just to clarify, the SDC offset by general fund money is actually only temporary. It's only
Correct.
for
It's
2
only
years.
For 2 years, that's correct.
And then in the third year, we actually do get additional monies.
That's correct.
So the approximately $1.5 million that we'll get. The reason this is a big, gigantic problem comes out when we talk about renter protections. The median rent for multifamily rental housing is $1,058. That means at housing burden rates, you need an income of $42,000. Well, the average renter income is $26,000, which means they can't afford the average. So that's why 58% of people are housing burdened. They pay 30% or more. And 36%, a third of the people who rent pay more than 50% of their income on rent. That's why we're talking about this. The fact that we have a very limited amount of money because we chose to do a 0.5% and then 1% means that that's the problem we should focus on. So in addition to the list of rental payment assistance fund, first and last month, navigator, single application process, policy on deposits and how they get done and how much they can be and how much how they get returned. Pet fees is another big issue that came up in the survey. There's a conversation about landlord retaliation for people who complain about and use the rental code. And then there's a whole, another part of the survey talked about the awareness of all these programs is pretty low. It's like around half the people understand that we do have a rental code. So pumping more money into the education about those programs also should be coming out of this. So the amount of money we have is very small. So having these types of programs are the things that we need to focus this money on. The federal money can go towards leveraging things like what Ben did. We're not going to be able to do that. We're not going to leverage our monies for new affordable housing projects because we don't have enough on an annual basis. We're just barely going to be able to do that. All the stuff that's going to come out of the rental, what's the housing policy,
Renter Protections Committee.
Rental Protection Committee is going to come up with some recommendations. They're going to have no money, no staff. This is the source of that money to be able to fulfill what they come up with, plus other things that we need to do. And there is no other source for that. So this is where it's got to come from, and this is where I think we should exclusively put the CET money into.
Claire.
So some of Alan's comments made me have a question, which you might not have an answer to right this second. But I thought that our rental housing fund, I might be naming it wrong, but the one that landlords pay a set fee, that I thought that had a surplus at some point, and we had encouraged staff to do additional outreach and engagement using that money, and I believe that was being implemented. So that's correct. So I don't want to forget that still exists, it is still working, and maybe it could be expanded further, and maybe we can supplement it, but kind of along the lines of what Jennifer was suggesting, you know, as much context as we can have for the recommendations that are brought back, and, you know, ancillary information about programs that we know already exist and how they connect in would be super helpful.
Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, we're very much thinking about how do we take the results of that survey, council discussion, how do we incorporate it into future use of our federal funds, the rental housing code, and then also CET is another flexible source. You know, I will say, you know, part of the sort of challenge is this balancing between different goals. You know, so in recognition of the renter challenges in our community, one continuing goal has been to try to increase the supply of affordable rental housing. This is something the committee is going to grapple with. We're going to come back in January. We're going to grapple with it again. And so, you know, what's sort of the balance between those things? You want to improve the housing opportunities for both renters and homeowners. There are different ways to go about doing it, and there's choices we have to make with the limited resources. I will say, you know, when we are developing housing, we do have opportunities to leverage a lot of other resources, and we're expanding the number of housing opportunities. So I think we'll likely try to come back with options for you in terms of what you want to focus on. And this can change. You know, we have the setup so that we're going to come back, review this every 2 years. So I think that it will change over time in response to the needs of the community and the direction from council.
Alan has raised his hand for a third, but I just want to interject because I really appreciate those comments, and I think it's really important to remember that part of the pressure on renters is also the short supply, which is driving the price up. And so there is the remediation and the protection for renters, which is really critically important, but there is also the supply that enables us to start to get ahead of that problem instead of just you know, helping the current situation. So I don't want to lose track of that. When we started the CET process, part of it was how can we make it possible for builders to build more housing that people can afford? And I don't want to lose sight of that, even though there's tight funds and there are lots. So I really do deeply appreciate your comments on that and want to remind council that's a critical goal here. Okay, Alan, one more and then we're done.
Yeah, Mike has his hand up too.
Oh, two more. Okay, then we're done.
One comment on that. The amount of things that came out of the housing task force, tools task force, that were related to actually moving the dial of increasing the amount of affordable housing is almost non-existent. I have almost no faith that actually that process is going to result in more affordable housing units. And in fact, one of the questions I had is, how are we tracking that? Do we have a metric that says from today, July 1, when we started the CET and this stuff that we're doing, that in 2 years, we're going to be able to say, we had this many affordable housing units that were built. And then, are we doing that on an actual basis? So we'll be able to track affordable housing units.
So one thing that we do for our federal funds is we have a 5-year numeric target. We can establish those kinds of numeric targets as well for use of CET funds. Part of it is we're trying to just understand how much of the resource is going to be generated in the first year for 6 months. And then also, in terms of the different kinds of programs, so for example, if we say we want to use more of the resource for down payment assistance, we would establish a goal for, okay, $200,000 for down payment assistance. Do we want to do $20,000 of down payment assistance per household or $10,000? Then you would be able to figure out how many households you would be able to support. So this is a little bit of the process that we're going to try to work through with the committee. I would welcome having additional conversations with counselors about your goals. There's also going to be a lot of opportunity over the next year to talk about the consolidated plan. We grapple with very similar issues within the consolidated plan, so that's also points in time where council can provide perspective and guidance on these issues.
But I would also say, Alan, I think remember in Envision Eugene, the 7th pillar is about measuring, and partly what we're really trying to do with that is as the strategies are implemented, then what you want to know is either individually or collectively, do the strategies move us towards where we want to go? So it's, you can set the goals, but then we have to see how effective they are. And so I'm interpreting your question as that also, that as we think about all of the different strategies, part of them relate to this, part of them are the other kinds of things that are involved in this. Given all of that, how effective are we at moving, and are we able to tell which of the levers are making the difference? And so when we come back periodically, we can say, this lever helps, this one actually didn't help, so let's not do that anymore. And that, I think, that's what I'm thinking what your question is starting to get at, is how do we use all that information to make future decisions on how the money gets used? And so the answer would be yes, we would also want to do that for this, just like we're wanting to do that for Envision Eugene.
So, yeah, thank you for that clarification. So besides what we get from the feds, which creates actual affordable housing units, what's the incremental change that we see from all the efforts that we put forward? And in 2 years, we want to say, that's 100 extra units. And these are the 3 things that we did that made the most difference. These didn't make any difference.
Or units, or people's ability to
stay in affordable.
To stay or to now afford their housing differently, right? And so I think it's about units, but it's also about people's ability to afford their housing, whether it's rental or owners.
And all that laundry list of programs that are around that. So when we did the prioritization for the marijuana tax, the council actually voted and said, this is what we want to see as a priority. And we haven't kind of got there. So I'll throw out one for purposes of making it clear what the direction of the council is, and that is on the slide, go back a few, the potential focus areas, desired outcomes, focus areas, that the vast majority, I move that the vast majority of the CET funds be used on direct assistance to renters and home buyers with the at least 15% minimum residential CET set aside for down payment assistance, because that's part of it.
Second.
Discussion, Claire?
It's a new cue, maybe. Can I be in it?
So I appreciate giving sound direction, and I just want to wonder if we pass this motion, is that I wouldn't want that precluding the advisory committee bringing back recommendations that don't necessarily line up exactly with this motion. So I still want that flexibility, because I want to hear, because I'm not the expert necessarily on everything. I definitely have opinions and ideas, but I also really very much want to hear from the advisory committee. So I wouldn't want our motion to stunt the recommendations we might get from that advisory group. So
I
don't
can,
know if
I can
that's-
clarify how I would take the motion.
Thank you.
And so then we can talk about that. So what I would think is, the advisory committee presumably could do whatever they choose to do. If the council says that a minimum of a majority of the dollars, so 51% of the dollars goes to that, I would anticipate that my recommendation back to you would be that, regardless of what the advisory committee comes up with. Now, we would weave all that back in, and we could tell you what they may recommend that exact same thing or not. I don't know. I think we could talk about that. But I would take it as direction from the council that your expectation is that 51% of the dollars are appropriated or anticipated to be allocated towards that, and then we can sort of talk about whether that's good or bad at that time. So.
And then presumably this council could change the ratio with a future motion. And by direct assistance to renters and home buyers, if that's the language of the motion, that could also include things that Councilor Zelenka mentioned around like a single application fee portal. Would that be considered direct assistance? I don't know, that costs a lot of money, but I mean, there are other policy ideas that were mentioned that weren't necessarily direct assistance. So that's.
Yeah, I think you're working on the demand side rather than the supply side, generally. It feels like that tends to be what that
Yeah,
would say.
okay.
All right, Mike, and then Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to speak to the mayor's concern in the previous thing, but it supports this. I'm absolutely in favor of this. As I said before, and the reason I said that, anything that we can do to increase the amount we are doing to assist low-income people to buy homes rather than rent them. I think we're about to see we already live in a city that's disproportionate to many other cities in terms of our rental versus home ownership. It's about to become massively skewed farther towards a high number of rentals. I mean, I would urge the mayor not to worry too hard about the number of rentals, because I think they're about to increase on a very large scale. House Bill 2001 has created a reality where I'm already building in my professional world the website that shows every R1 property in town, every one of them that's got CC&Rs, every one of them you can tear down to build a fourplex. And I assure you, I'm not the only one who's talking about this. Realtors all over town are. So I wouldn't worry that we're going to see a fairly massive increase in the number of rental units that will further disproportion towards what I think will be a proportion of poverty because of that bill. But the prices won't necessarily be lower with a higher supply, because the costs of creating them plus 25% will be where the rents are. So your legislature has created a reality that in our community, I think, will be particularly hard hit by the negative effects of that.
Okay. Chris, and then we have to wrap this up because we have another item.
I think probably one of the reasons I won't support the motion is because this is our very first work session talking about how to use the CET. And we haven't yet put our committee together that's going to give us advice on all the things we could do. There, as I mentioned before, flexibility is one of the strong suits. And here we are at the first work session saying, you know what, I've heard enough. I'm ready to start narrowing this down to just work on this stuff. And it may be, that may be what it is, but I want to wait and go through a little bit of the more deliberative process before I'm really ready to go there. So I'm going to err on the side of maintaining the flexibility, at least through the process of getting the committee together, giving us some more feedback. Maybe by the second or third work session talking about this, then I'll be ready to start narrowing down, but I'm just not ready to start narrowing down today.
Okay, Alan, did you want to clarify?
So just to clarify on that point, Chris, this isn't the motion was to allow the majority of monies, not all of it. So it clearly allows for a flexibility of what the committee wants to do. So just to be clear about, my motion was to have the majority of the CET funds be directed at direct assistance to renters and home buyers, plus at least 15% for the down payment assistance as required by law. And so it really is about showing what the emphasis that we want the committee to come back to us and focus on. It doesn't limit them in terms of their flexibility, but it does give them a direction, as was true when we did the marijuana tax. We said, do it in these 3 areas. We didn't say, do this in that area, this in that area, and this in that area. I don't know exactly what the committee's going to come up with, but they can come up with some good ideas, plus some other ideas, but that should be the focus area, because we have so little money to work with.
So I just think the fundamental question is, how soon is the appropriate time to start kind of narrowing in on your values? And I'm inclined to say I would let the committee form, but that's up to you as a council to vote on that. So we're going to go for a vote. We're going to.
I had one more sentence.
Okay,
before you
sorry.
interrupt.
Okay.
And the reason to do it now is because the committee's going to be formed in August. We're not going to meet until after they've already met and they're kind of set up and going. So the time to do that is before they meet, as opposed to after they meet and come up with stuff. So just to get clear direction from us to the city manager to the committee is the nature of this motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. It has been seconded. Has it been seconded?
Yes.
Yes? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, opposed, 3. Okay, there you go. That passes. So thank you very much. I am going to ask for a motion to extend this meeting, and I'm going to ask for a motion to extend this meeting until 1:45. Someone would put that forward, because we have an item we've deferred twice. We have to get to it, and I want them to have at least extended by 10 minutes. So can I get a motion to extend, Betty?
I'll make a motion to extend the meeting by 10 minutes.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 2. Okay, we extend by 10 minutes. Thank you. All right, next round.
Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. I'm Jen Yettis Vanderhagen with the Office of Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement. I'm here to give you an overview of where we've been regarding the Protections of Individuals Ordinance, and also seek guidance on where you would like us to go in terms of potentially adjusting the existing ordinance with amendments. And I'm going to give you the high points for the sake of time. So as you'll recall, you all took very important steps in late 2016 and early 2017 to move towards establishing the Protections of Individuals Ordinance. That resulted in March of 2017 a unanimous vote in support. In May of 2018, city departments were asked to review their existing policies regarding how they're collecting data. That was at the city manager's direction, and you received a report on that in June of 2018. In September of 2018, the city manager put into place an administrative order. That administrative order specifically directs staff, excuse me, let me get the language right. It's a policy prohibiting the collection and maintenance of immigration status by city employees, except in certain circumstances. And following that, what brings us here today is direction that we received to come back with a work session to have a discussion on where you might like to go next. Just a very quick summary. You'll recall that when we spoke to you about the inventory that was done in different city departments, we specifically asked each department to clarify whether or not data that was collected was legally required by state or federal statute, to share the reason why they collected it, and to identify how it was collected or maintained. The information we found largely fell into these 2 buckets of categories. What we found was that the information that was collected often fell into 1 to 3 areas as to why it was collected, right? And these are the main areas. So the first is whether or not it was legally required by state or federal law. The second was to provide services to the community to ensure that we were doing the best we could in our service provision. And finally, in an effort to advance our equity goals. It's also important to note that this information that we found, most data collected is maintained and is password protected or locked in hard copy and only accessed by the proper staff and is considered confidential. The other thing that we want to make sure to note is that almost all of this data is self-reported and optional in many cases in the area of service provision especially. Data is collected and kept in aggregate for the most part and not individually identifiable. I'll just give very quick examples of these. So legally required, we're all familiar with I-9s. We need to fill them out. It's a federal requirement for employment. Service provision, we have an adaptive rec program that seeks to serve people with varying levels of ability. We have a form that we could ascertain information about people's disability status through in order to make sure that we're providing the proper adjustments to our service. And finally, for advancing equity goals, the Eugene Police Department and Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement put out an annual report on hate crimes and the motivation behind them. We collect that information as to what was perceived as the motivation for hate activity. Let's see. I think I will just quickly share with you the actions taken since we have had the city manager's administrative order in place. So upon the adoption of the administrative order, staff received electronic communications about the order. The executive team conveyed information to their employees to make sure that folks knew that it was in place. And finally, in some cases, especially with city staff who have a very high level of community engagement in their work, they were provided training that to help them understand how to properly adhere to the ordinance and the admin order in their daily activities. This training was developed with the guidance of the city attorney's office and implemented through Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement. Today that we are bringing forward this language, it's draft language for your discussion. In July of 2018, Councilor Surratt requested a work session to discuss policies, administrative rules, and ordinances that could be developed to adopted to ensure that individually identifiable information is not collected or maintained without a specific and legitimate purpose and not required by federal or state law. The language we're bringing to you today effectively puts the administrative order into ordinance, restricting city employees in collecting and maintaining individually identifiable information as it relates to immigration status in certain circumstances. We believe that the existing and additional city policies can be utilized to ensure that information that is collected and maintained outside of those parameters can be done in a secure manner and for the purpose that they were intended. With that, I'll turn it back to the mayor. Thank you.
Okay, questions, clarifications, Claire?
Thank you, Jennifer, for a very succinct presentation. Thank you for the work that you and others have done to bring this proposed amendment to our ordinance forward. I want to say, in addition, I want to thank my colleagues for reconsidering our resolution condemning white supremacy and hatred earlier in our work session, having a unanimous vote on that. I do really appreciate the work around that. And I'm very proud of this council, the past efforts that the council, the city manager, and now our new police chief have taken to ensure that all residents of our city feel secure in doing business with the city and accessing city services without fearing that we are going to turn over their personal information to another government agency without due process, such as a legal warrant. And I believe this additional language, if we were to adopt it, would even further strengthen those measures and I think really help protect our city employees from being placed in a position where they're not certain if they are required to give a federal agent or some other law enforcement agent that's not from the city access to city collected information. So the proposal that I have, and Jennifer actually supplied me with some language for a motion for our meeting on Monday that I'm kind of incorporated. So you can tell me, Glenn, if I'm doing this correctly. But so I'd like to make a motion that would end up moving this draft language to a public hearing. So I move to direct the city manager to schedule a public hearing on an ordinance substantially similar to the attachment B from the city council's packet dated July 22nd, 2019.
Second.
Anyone needing to speak to that? All ready for vote? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. None opposed, so that passes. That's excellent. That was easy. We didn't even need extended time.
We got to sit here for 15
But I will just, since Betty actually did not hold true to her threat that she would walk out on us without committee reports and items of interest, Betty, you do have the floor here if you have something you want to bring up.
I've got 15 minutes now. Since you extended it, but I don't need that much time. I wanted to mention some things that constituents have been talking to me about and been very upset about. One thing is all the tents along the bike path. People have said they are afraid. This is women especially who are riding bikes alone. And I don't know whether they've been approached. I haven't dug into that, but really upset that the city's not doing anything. And not that I know what we can do, but I wanted to bring that to the council, the concern. People are very concerned about the payroll tax, and they're concerned, many people wonder why we're not burying the power lines on Willamette while we have the opportunity, and thinking that it's a worthy use of funds, which I agree with. And I wanted to say one of the best things the city does is the free symphony in the park. That's happening this Friday. Not that there are tickets still available, but there might be if people have turned in extra tickets. And it's one of the best things we do. One of the worst things we do is charge library fines. Well, anything we do to make poor people more poor, this is in line with the payroll tax on people not making much money. That if you're poor, people who make over $100,000 a year don't have any idea of how it feels to barely get by, to barely have enough to buy groceries, to know that you can't pay for your child to go to some activity, all the things that poor people agonize over. And then for the library, I have here exact things. If your total fee reaches $10 or more, which doesn't take very long, since we're charging 50 cents a day per book, then you can't use the card. And I think we want poor people to be able to read. And if the charges reach $50, the account's referred to a collection agency, which is something I think is really terrible for the city to be sending out a collection agency to get money from people who are already trying to get by. And then not only will you be faced with the collection agency, but assessed a $20 non-refundable collection charge. And if an item is 30 days past due, it's considered lost, you'll get a bill for the cost of the item. And I think this is something that we should look into. I had one really good thing the city's doing and one thing really bad. I think also we should protect people whose cars get taken to a lot and they're charged so much money that they can't redeem the car and lose their cars. And that's in line with keeping homes. If everything that makes you more poor makes it less likely that you can stay in your home. Thank you.
Mayor, I can talk about the library fines. Well, I'll have Renee send something out. We are currently taking a look at eliminating overdue fees, particularly for youth. And so we're in the process of relooking that as we speak. And so we'll have Renee send something back out to the whole council.
Not just youth, it's other people too. Thank you.
Anybody else? I have two quick ones, abbreviated. I last week had a chance with the city manager to participate in the International Disabled Women's Conference. The acronym is WILD. I can't remember exactly what it stands for, that Susan Segal organizes. And it is really phenomenal. These women come from all over the world, and some of them are profoundly disabled, and they're traveling across the country, and they're living in our community and learning about how we make the community accessible. They have two events next week. One is Thursday night, the first, and the other one is Friday night. The Thursday night is a kind of performance. And I've just, these women are absolutely inspiring. It's a great heads up to us about the work we do well. Some of them had some input for me of things they thought we were dropping the ball on. And so highly recommend you tracking this incredible work. The other piece is I had intended to tell you more about my attendance at the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the Climate Summit, which was the Climate Mayors Summit, and so I'll send more information to you around that. I gave 5 presentations in 5 days, and the first one was to the climate mayors, and based on that was invited to serve on the steering committee for the climate mayors, which I am choosing to do because I think it will open some opportunities for the city of Eugene, both in terms of extending our knowledge and also what we have to share with others, but also perhaps maybe some other opportunities to attract support from, organizations like the Bloomberg Foundation. So we're not on their radar because we're a small city. So just a quick report on that. And with that, I wish you, yes, one more? Okay.
Two quick ones.
Perfect.
Thank you for bringing up the Mayusa Wild Women group. It is pretty phenomenal. And one of the things that, without exception, they really do appreciate all the accessibility that we have here in Eugene. It's pretty phenomenal from their perspective, particularly as they look back at their country and other cities here. And then 2, if you've never had a chance to attend the Girls Fire Camp, it's going on this week. And I would highly encourage you to do that. It's very inspiring. Our firefighters and their interaction with many youth in this community that spend a week, girls spending a week learning about the firefighting profession, but more importantly, they learn a lot about confidence and self-confidence, and it's a pretty phenomenal event. So if you have a chance to do that, we'd be happy to have you go out and spend a little bit of time with them.
If you can't make it, if you go to their graduation, they have an awesome video of all the stuff they get to do, and you will want to sign up for that camp, but you cannot.
Unless you're a teenage girl.
Unless you're a teenage girl.
Yeah,
We got to do a city council one.
yeah. I went to, I went and had, yeah.
I'd like to do that again.
They're great. I went and had lunch with them. They're inspiring, these strong, young, brave women. It's just really great. Okay, I hope you all have a wonderful summer break. Happy travels if you're traveling, happy camping if you're camping, and happy Burning Man for the burning woman in our lives. And we will see you in September.